It was a cold, stormy night in the small town of Ravenswood when John decided to remarry. He had lost his first wife, Emily, to a tragic accident, leaving him with 2 children, Mark and Lily. They were everything to him, but raising them alone was becoming increasingly difficult. That's when he met Clara. She was kind, beautiful, and seemed perfect in every way. She had a way with the children, always smiling, trying to make them happy, and John thought she could be the perfect mother they needed. But there was something off about Clara. The children sensed it from the start. Her smile was too wide, too perfect, almost as if it were plastered onto her face. Mark, the elder of the 2, often had nightmares about that smile. Lily, though younger, was more perceptive. She often told her father that Clara scared her. John dismissed their fears as part of adjusting to the new family dynamics. As time passed, Clara's true nature began to reveal itself in subtle ways. She would often stand in the dark corners of the house, humming old, eerie tunes that no one recognized. Her eyes seemed to follow the children wherever they went, and her smile never faltered, not even for a second. Mark and Lily started to avoid her as much as possible, retreating to their rooms whenever John wasn't around. One fateful day, John had to leave town for a business trip. He reassured the children that they would be fine with Clara. "She loves you," he said, kissing them goodbye. The children watched him leave with a sinking feeling in their hearts. As soon as John was gone, the atmosphere in the house changed. Clara's smile widened to an unnatural extent, and her eyes glowed with a sinister light. "We're going to have so much fun," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. The children felt a chill run down their spines. That night, as the storm raged outside, Mark and Lily huddled together in Mark's room. They heard strange noises coming from downstairs, whispering, footsteps, and the sound of furniture being moved. They decided to investigate, hoping it was just their imagination. They crept down the stairs, holding onto each other for support. The living room was empty, but they could hear Clara's voice coming from the kitchen. They peeked through the doorway and saw her standing by the window, her back to them. She was talking to someone, but there was no one else there. Her reflection in the window showed her true form. Her face was twisted, her eyes black voids, and her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. The children gasped in horror. Clara turned around slowly, her eyes locking onto theirs. "You shouldn't be here," she said in a voice that was not her own. It was deep, guttural, and filled with malice. Mark and Lily ran back up the stairs, slamming the door behind them. They could hear Clara's footsteps following them, slow and deliberate. They barricaded themselves in Mark's room, praying for the night to end. But Clara was relentless. She banged on the door, laughing maniacally. "Come out, children," she taunted. "I just want to play." The banging stopped suddenly, and the house fell silent. Mark and Lily held their breath, listening intently. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. They could feel her presence outside the door, waiting. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to die down. The children, exhausted, eventually fell asleep, clutching each other tightly. When they woke up, it was morning, and the house was eerily quiet. They cautiously opened the door and found the house empty. Clara was nowhere to be seen. They tried to call their father, but the phone lines were down due to the storm. Desperate, they decided to leave the house and find help. As they stepped outside, they saw Clara standing in the garden, her back to them. She was holding something in her hands, whispering to herself. Mark and Lily backed away slowly, but Clara turned around, her face contorted into a mask of rage. "You can't leave," she screeched. "You're mine now." Her body began to twist and contort, her limbs elongating, her fingers turning into claws. The children screamed and ran back into the house, slamming the door behind them. They ran to the basement, hoping to find a place to hide. The basement was dark and damp, filled with old furniture and boxes. They hid behind an old wardrobe, trying to stay as quiet as possible. They could hear Clara's footsteps above them, searching the house. "She's a monster," Lily whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mark hugged her tightly, trying to comfort her. "We'll find a way out," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. Hours passed, and the house fell silent again. The children stayed hidden, too afraid to move. Eventually, they heard a familiar voice calling their names. It was their father. They ran up the stairs and found him standing in the living room, looking worried. "Dad," they cried, running to him. John hugged them tightly, relief washing over his face. "What happened?" he asked, looking around. "Where's Clara?" she said. "Monster," Mark said, his voice trembling. "She tried to hurt us." John looked confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Clara's been worried sick about you. She called me last night, saying you were missing." The children looked at each other, their faces pale. "That's not true," Lily said. "She was here. She changed." John looked at them, concern etched on his face. "I think you've had a nightmare," he said gently. "Let's find Clara and talk about this." Reluctantly, the children followed their father through the house. Clara was in the kitchen, looking perfectly normal. She smiled at them, but the children recoiled in fear. "What's wrong, my dears?" she asked sweetly. "They had a bad dream," John explained, looking at Clara. "They thought you were different." Clara's smile faltered for a moment, and her eyes darkened. "Oh, children," she said softly, "I would never hurt you. You must have been very scared." Mark and Lily didn't believe her, but they didn't know what else to do. They stayed close to their father, hoping he would protect them. As the days passed, Clara continued to act normal, but the children couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, while their father was asleep, Mark and Lily decided to search Clara's room. They found a locked drawer in her dresser and managed to pick the lock using a hairpin. Inside, they found old photographs and letters, all addressed to someone named Marguerite. The photographs showed a woman who looked exactly like Clara, but the dates were from over a century ago. The letters spoke of dark rituals and forbidden magic. The children realized that Clara was not who she claimed to be. They confronted Clara the next morning, showing her the photographs and letters. Her face twisted in rage, and her true form emerged once again. "You meddling brats," she screamed. "You've ruined everything." John rushed into the room, alarmed by the commotion. He saw Clara's monstrous form and grabbed the children, pulling them away from her. "What are you?" he demanded. "I am Marguerite," she snarled. "I was cursed long ago, and I need your children's souls to break the curse." John pushed the children behind him, facing the creature that had deceived him. "You'll never touch them," he said defiantly. Marguerite laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the house. "You can't stop me," she hissed. "I am eternal." As she advanced towards them, the children remembered something they had read in the letters, a way to banish Marguerite forever. They recited the incantation together, their voices trembling but determined. Marguerite screamed in fury as the words took effect. Her body began to disintegrate, turning into a cloud of black smoke. "This isn't over," she screeched as she vanished into thin air. The house fell silent once more. John held his children tightly, his heart pounding with fear and relief. "It's over," he whispered, though he knew they would never forget the horrors they had faced. As the days turned into weeks, the family tried to move on from the ordeal. They never spoke of Marguerite again, but her presence lingered in their minds. John vowed to protect his children no matter what, and the children learned to trust their instincts. Years later, they moved to a new town, hoping to leave the past behind. But sometimes, late at night, they could still hear Marguerite's haunting laughter, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of the ordinary world. As the years passed, John, Mark, and Lily did their best to forget the terror that had once infiltrated their lives. They moved to a quiet town, far from Ravenswood, hoping for a fresh start. They settled into a modest house with a garden where the children could play, and John took up a job at a local bookstore. The memory of Marguerite, the monstrous entity masquerading as Clara, faded into the background, though it never entirely disappeared. Mark and Lily grew up, making new friends and finding new interests. Yet, there was always a shadow of fear that lingered in their eyes, a shared secret that set them apart from others. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Lily mentioned a strange incident at school. "There's a new girl in my class," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She has a smile just like hers." John and Mark exchanged worried glances. "Lily, are you sure?" John asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lily nodded. "She gave me this," she said, placing a small, ornate box on the table. It was old, with intricate carvings and a lock shaped like a crescent moon. Mark's face paled as he recognized the design from the letters they had found years ago. "We need to open it," he said quietly. John fetched a pair of pliers, and with some effort, they managed to pry the box open. Inside was a piece of parchment, yellowed with age, covered in strange symbols. As they examined it, the temperature in the room dropped, and the lights flickered. Lily backed away, fear in her eyes. "What does it mean?" she asked. Mark, who had taken an interest in studying ancient languages after their encounter with Marguerite, squinted at the parchment. "It's a summoning spell," he said grimly. "It's meant to bring her back." John slammed the box shut. "We need to destroy this," he said urgently. "We can't let her come back." They decided to burn the parchment and the box, hoping to rid themselves of the dark presence once and for all. As the flames consumed the items, they heard a faint, echoing laugh, Marguerite's laugh. It sent chills down their spines, but they hoped it was just their imagination. Life seemed to return to normal after that. The new girl at Lily's school stopped smiling in that unnerving way, and the family began to relax once more. But the calm was short-lived. One night, a violent storm descended upon the town. The wind howled, and lightning lit up the sky. Mark, now in his late teens, was home alone, studying for an upcoming exam. John was at work, and Lily was at a friend's house for a sleepover. As Mark read through his notes, he heard a noise coming from the basement. It was a low, guttural sound, like something scraping against the walls. He tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was just the wind. But the noise grew louder, more insistent. Mark grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the basement door. He hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest, before slowly opening the door. The air was cold and damp, and the beam of his flashlight revealed old furniture and boxes covered in dust. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling. There was no response, but the scraping noise continued. He followed the sound to a corner of the basement where an old wardrobe stood. As he approached, the door creaked open on its own. Inside was not just empty space, but a dark void, a portal that seemed to lead to another world. Mark stepped back, horrified. From the darkness, a hand emerged, a twisted, clawed hand that grabbed onto the edge of the wardrobe. Mark turned to run, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping him inside. The hand was followed by a face, Marguerite's face, contorted in a malicious grin. "Did you miss me?" she hissed. Desperate, Mark looked for anything he could use to defend himself. He found an old, rusty crowbar and swung it at the hand, but it passed through as if striking air. Marguerite laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the basement. "You can't fight me, Mark," she said, stepping out of the wardrobe. "I'm part of this world now." Mark felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. He knew he couldn't fight her alone. He needed his family. Summoning all his courage, he ran towards the basement door, throwing his weight against it until it finally burst open. He raced upstairs, slamming the door behind him and blocking it with a chair. He grabbed his phone and called his father. "Dad, she's back," he shouted, his voice shaking. "Marguerite is back." John's voice on the other end was filled with shock and fear. "I'm coming home right now. Stay safe, son." Mark then called Lily, telling her to stay at her friend's house and not come home. "We need to deal with this together," he told her. "But it's not safe here." Within minutes, John was home. They heard banging and laughter coming from the basement. We need to end this, once and for all, John said, determination in his eyes. They searched through the house for anything that might help them. Mark remembered the letters they had found years ago and pulled out the translations he had made. There's a banishing ritual here, he said. We need to perform it together. They gathered the necessary items, candles, salt, and a mirror. They sat up in the living room, forming a circle of salt around them. Mark read the incantation aloud, his voice steady despite his fear. The temperature dropped, and the room filled with a thick, oppressive darkness. Marguerite's laughter echoed around them, but they continued the ritual, their voices growing stronger. As they reached the final words, a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a scream pierced the air, Marguerite's scream. The darkness lifted, and the oppressive presence vanished. The house was still once more. John and Mark looked at each other, relief washing over them. Is it over? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I think so, John replied, hugging his son. We did it. Lily returned home the next day, and they explained what had happened. The family vowed to stay vigilant, but they hoped that Marguerite was finally gone for good. As the years passed, they rebuilt their lives, always carrying the memory of those dark days with them. They knew that evil could be banished but never truly destroyed. They had faced their fears and emerged stronger, bound by their love for each other. And though the shadows still lingered at the edges of their lives, they knew they would face whatever came next together, united and unafraid.